if this is new, this whole space is new to you, you hear about someone who's autistic. If you're over a certain age, you're going to think, come on. There we go. You're going to think Rain Man, because that's the classic, this is an autistic. But a lot of us, this was our first time we'd ever heard the word, right? And so we're thinking, okay, if someone's autistic, they're going to be some savant with these amazing abilities, or they're going to be quirky, they're not going to be really good at social interactions, all that sort of stuff. Can't really cope with the real world, need a lot of help to get through the real world. But it's not necessarily what you get. And so we have to sort of get beyond that, what does an autistic person look like kind of thing. So a lot of times people think the autism spectrum is a line. You're either low functioning or high functioning. You're a little autistic or you're a lot autistic. But it's really not a line so much as a bunch of pie wedges here. The weaknesses and strengths of each individual person with autism is going to be somewhere along these lengths. So someone might be really good at language and really poor at motor skills or something along those lines. So it's important not to think of it as this linear thing. Everyone's abilities are sort of multifaceted, and they're just better or worse than some others. The quote that lots of people have heard probably is, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. They're all very different. So this is something to really keep in mind when it comes to helping and accommodating your autistic students. You need to talk to them and find out what they actually need. Now, autism in adults is sometimes a little difficult to figure out, because if you didn't obviously get diagnosed as a small kid, the signs are a bit more subtle. And some people don't get diagnosed until college. It's something that, they manage to skirt along, but then college is this whole different thing, and now they're suddenly running against struggles. So things about reading body language, that can be a big problem in someone's group interactions. Preferring to that student who always do we have to work in a group? That there might be a reason for that. Not understanding those obvious social rules, like don't interrupt the professor in the middle of class with a question without raising your hand. The whole eye contact thing we've talked about. And so you may be seeing these behaviors in someone who either was recently diagnosed or hasn't been diagnosed. That's not to say that everybody who doesn't understand social rules is autistic. It's saying these are some of the ways it shows up. Now, for women, it's even more difficult because it often gets missed, because we're a lot better at hiding it. So women have often learned how to mask because there's those social expectations. Oh, you're going to behave, quote unquote. And so because we're good at masking, hiding our feelings, we often don't, if we get upset, we're not going to get aggressive. So we tend to sort of be able to sort out social situations. Things like stimming, which I'll talk about in a minute, but repetitive behaviors, there's a lot less of that in females just in general. And again, this is something that they might not even notice it themselves until they hit college. It's exactly what happened with me. I'm sailing along, all of a sudden I hit college, it's like, whoa, I used to just be able to do this without even blinking an eye. What happened? And so that can really throw somebody for a loop. Now, there's some key differences that are good to know about, because if we know about them, we can help people get around them. And I'm going to focus on sensory issues, communication, and understanding social situations, and also how information gets processed. So autism can come with a lot of sensory issues, such as not being able to work under fluorescent lights because the flicker drives you nuts, or not being able to work in a very crowded cube farm because it's too loud. With me, my sensory thing has always been taste and smell in particular. So most people, they're going to the ballpark, it's like, yay, Fenway Frank, and I'm sitting next to you, I'm holding my nose until you're done because I find the smell of hot dogs to be intolerable. And so, this is a problem when you're only vegetarian in the house, but it's one of the reasons I'm a vegetarian is because I can't stand the taste and smell of meat. So it's no big moral thing. It's just one of those sensory things. Now, some folks deal with their sensory issues by stimming, and if someone has, sometimes you've seen people with very obvious stimming, but a lot of times it's more subtle. It can be tapping your feet or kind of quietly snapping your fingers. For me, it's nail biting. I'm usually down to the third knuckle if I'm either really trying to concentrate or I'm really nervous. But and it's may not be socially acceptable, but it doesn't look like an out of the ordinary type of activity. A lot of folks use different sensory tools. They were given out some out there. And that can be difficult if you're expecting all of your students to act in a typical way. So you may see someone with headphones on, it's like, oh my God, that's so rude. Why do they have these headphones on in class? Well, they may be playing white noise so they can concentrate on you better and drown out their classmates. When they're fiddling with that Rubik's Cube, that may be how they're concentrating. I met someone once who crocheted during class, and he told people, if I'm crocheting, it means I really want to hear what you have to say, because that's how I concentrated. Now, some of these communication differences, there's a tendency sometimes to take things over literally. There is sometimes problems with figurative language, for example, rating cats and dogs, things like that, or taking the perspective of others, and also that need to understand why. Folks with autism, myself included, like things to be logical. And so I've gotten in trouble at work and other places because a change was being made. I didn't understand what was the purpose of the change. And I asked why a lot, and someone took it as challenging their authority. And I wasn't challenging their authority. I truly didn't understand why we were doing this, and without understanding why, I couldn't connect it to skills that I already had. So that can drive folks nuts, but it's not, again, it's not a challenge, it's a genuine desire to understand. There's also the problems with social conventions. I have a real hard time reading people's emotions. So I actually had a therapist once who I had to confess to her, her face always looked angry to me. And I knew she wasn't. She was a very nice lady, but it's like, if I didn't know you, I'd swear you were just completely angry at me all the time. And so that can definitely cause some difficulties. Empathy is another one. Empathy, people expect, someone to listen, someone to, kind of feel their emotions. A lot of times the way autistic folks convey empathy is by telling a story of their own. And that can make it seem like, oh, you're making this all about you. So they told you their cat died, and you tell the story of when your cat died. And it's like, it's not all about you. Well, that's how they convey empathy. They're telling the story to say, I've experienced this before too, so I know what you feel like. But that's not how it always comes across. Now, there's all these different processing differences, and they can be an issue both, again, work and school. Neurotypical folks often can deal with multiple ideas simultaneously, whereas if you say, okay, this quarter, these are the 3 things we're going to work on, an autistic brain might think, okay, we're going to do one and finish it, and then the other, and then the other, and that's not what you have going at all. There's a difference in how they can take in rapidly changing information. So there's rules set up, but if suddenly something changes in the rules, they're like, whoa, 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 and it's harder for them to switch tracks. The process of information, a lot of times autistic brains are thinking about how they're processing it. So if I have a train of thought, I often want to go and see where that train started because it helps me understand my own thinking. And a lot of neurotypical brains, they just sort of do this subconsciously. there's the idea of being intuitive versus really needing to reason things out. Things have to make sense and build on what you already know. And generally, ambiguous situations are not the favorite thing for folks who are autistic. So if I have a job description and I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do, I get anxious. I feel like, what is and isn't my job? That's something I would need to know. Now, neurodiversity comes with a lot of strengths, and especially in autism, there's some really great superpowers that come with it. And there's these differences in problem solving and lateral thinking and these levels of concentration. Those, you can tap into those to really help a project or a group or something at work. So, for example, autism tends to come with hyperfixations and hyperfocus and special interests. Now, ADHD does as well, and they're often comorbid. You'll often see one with the other. But what that means is that someone with autism, if they get interested in something, they're going to dig down to the bottom of that well, and they want to know everything in it. Now, if that interest happens to coincide with what you want them to do at work, this is awesome. Or if you let them choose their own project, and I've seen this in my students. So for their term project, they want to do something related to the NU Aero Club that they never ever actually leave. Like, I'm pretty sure they sleep in the NU Aero Club space. But that, you let them do a project on that, and they are gung-ho, and it's going to be amazing. So being able to tap into that is a great thing to be able to do. Now, we've heard about the verbal thinking and the visual learners, and that's totally true of a lot of people. I'm one of those weird engineers who doesn't have a very good visual space, so I have to work really hard to put visuals into my PowerPoints and stuff, because I could do text forever. But some of these other things, like the kinesthetic, I teach a lab class, and I love it because there's things to touch and manipulate and move, and I pass things around the class. I do open-ended experiments, and for people who really need to move around and touch things, this is great. The spatial thinkers, who are the ones who can look at a CAD drawing and have it actually make sense, supposed to be, and these logical and mathematical thinkers. I had a student not too long ago who told me that he thought in equations. So everything he saw, he made sense of it by thinking what equation would govern something like that. And I just thought that was amazing. I don't even want to know how his brain works, because it's probably way too above here for me to understand. There's also this idea of top-up and bottom-up processing. And a lot of neurotypical folks, they have a vision, they have a concept, and we're going to build on top of that. But sometimes you have okay, that vision isn't going to make sense until I get more detail and take the little details and build on those. So one set of brains is going to start with the big idea and go up from there, and the other is going to start with a lot of little ideas and start making connections until it comes to a big idea. Now, if you can get one of each on a team, that's pretty awesome, because they can both complement each other in their way of getting to the same spot. So this, because they're going to see a lot more details in different regions or whatever, that's going to be pretty helpful. And again, we've heard a lot about linear versus lateral thinking. Linear thinking is really, really necessary sometimes. If you're making a cake, you can't really skip to the end, because it's not going to work out so well. But if you are trying to get to some problem, you've hit a wall, having someone who's, oh, well, did you think about this little part? And we can just skip all that. That's where, again, this is a really useful person to have on your team. So how do we support these folks so that they can just do their best in our courses and such? Well, we've heard a lot about universal design for learning, and if you haven't heard of it, look it up, because it's really useful. Most folks here probably have. But the idea is that you're being flexible, you're trying to reduce whatever artificial barriers there are. So if something's hard because the subject's hard, that's different than something's hard because of some bureaucratic reason. So we want to make sure that the difficulty is in the topic, not because we've set up these structures that someone has to work around that really aren't necessary for learning. So, and also, like we've said, those high expectations, expecting that, you know, you're going to figure it out. You got into college, right? So you should be able to figure this out. Just might need to give you a little boost here and there. Social interactions for folks who are autistic, you really want to avoid that cold calling. It's like, you over there, what do you think? And it's like, ah. So yeah, you don't need to do that necessarily. Flexible grouping, maybe they can do one thing, one of the assignments by themselves, or maybe the groups switch up. Being able to participate in multiple ways. That's why I love things like, I use Top Hat for an engagement tool, and they can submit things anonymously, that's the word. And by doing that, they're able to do their ideas, even if their ideas are really out there, and no one's gonna know it was them. And that helps a lot. When you have to grade presentations, and I always have presentations in my classes, you have to get out of the mindset that they have to be facing the audience and making eye contact and all that. I've kind of changed it so that as long as I can hear you and understand you, and I'm learning what you want me to learn, we're gonna call it good. So you have to look down, and I've had people who had to present on Zoom because they had such bad anxiety, and that's fine by me. And also just looking at how the teams are doing and coaching the people who either need a little bit more information on how to get along with their team, or vice versa, coaching the team that's struggling with somebody who's out of step with the rest of them. Flexible policies don't mean that you're lowering your standards. And this is something you really should emblazon on your mind. The idea of academic rigor is all about high standards for everybody and making sure that there's scaffolds to get there. It's not about, do they get things in exactly at 5 o'clock on the dot. If you turned in something 10 minutes late at work, you're probably not going to get fired instantly. So a lot of that, oh, well, that's not what it's like in the real world. I mean, come on. Most bosses will give you a little bit of leeway. And when you start enforcing this on folks, the folks with the accommodations might get it, but what about those folks who don't get the accommodations because they can't afford that diagnosis, that formal diagnosis? Well, that's just kind of reproducing all these inequalities. So we're compounding student stress and burning them out, but it's not really helping them learn the material. And if we're really going to be super, super strict with no possible ways to extend the time, then we're going to get more cheating. Because if they know that, you're not going to give them an inch, well, then they're going to do everything they can to get it in. So some of these things they don't really teach the students that much. Communication. And this is one that I really wish some of my professors had known. The idea of, if there's a hidden agenda, just don't. A lot of folks with autism and with ADHD, we just don't get the hidden agendas. Be honest, be open, be frank with what you're saying. Be clear, don't use jargon that's undefined, don't use acronyms that aren't defined. Give people time to process. So if you say something, don't instantly ask questions. Give them a minute to sort of have that sink in. Make sure that you're providing whatever materials in as many formats as you can, whether that's video, audio, pictures, words, what have you. And asking students how they like to communicate. Now, I personally love email, but I know my students don't. A lot of them would rather text. So it's like, okay, let's compromise. I'll use the chat in the Microsoft Teams. That way you can get your short bursts of information and I don't need to give out my cell number. I teach 167 students sometimes. This is a bad thing. So when you get that student who's got that awkward behavior, or that they're driving their team nuts, or they're being disruptive in some way, pause for a moment and don't immediately think this guy is a problem, but could this person benefit from some of the supports that are good for autistic souls? And if so, then try it out. Thank you very much.